Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Dr. Thad Mantero, Dean of Student Health and Wellness at Dallas College. We are so excited to have you with us today for Beyond Silos, Bridging Academic and Student Affairs to Advance Student, and I would add, Employee Wellbeing. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today. In a few minutes, we will hear from a panel of subject matter experts featuring members of the LearningWell Coalition and the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network. Before we get started, a little background about our sponsoring organizations. The LearningWell Coalition is a group of leaders in higher education dedicated to evidence-based, learner-centered education that creates the foundation for well-being and work engagement throughout life. Through assessment, collaboration, and best practice sharing with member institutions, the Coalition strives to inspire the Academy to prioritize lifelong well-being. The U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network is a collaborative group of higher ed institutions dedicated to fostering a culture of well-being by adopting the International Okanagan Charter. The Charter calls on campuses to embed health into all aspects of campus culture, including policies, the built environment, and academic curricula. Well, a little background about how this webinar came to be. A few years ago, I was traveling and happened upon actually a LearningWell radio podcast with Joe Tranquillo, one of the panelists, and the Associate Provost for Transformative Teaching and Learning at Bucknell. In the podcast, Joe described his amazing work at Bucknell and how he was working within academic affairs to foster well-being through the Thrive framework across the institution. The framework generated something like 300 university-wide initiatives that enhance student well-being, meet basic needs, enhance a sense of belonging, improve access and use of resources, and enable holistic growth. He was able to achieve so much progress in such a short period through strategic choices and deep collaboration that Bucknell saw first-year retention jump several percentage points in just a year and a half, exceeding the goals that had been set. I reached out to Joe because I was so moved by what he had accomplished, and we came to be close colleagues. We came to understand that there was an opportunity to share a little bit more about the well-being programs at our divergent institutions. Joe at a small private liberal arts institution and me at a really incredibly big, diverse community college in the DFW Metroplex. In March of 2025, we presented to the New York Six and the U.S. College, Upstate New York College Collaborative on our respective well-being programs. Following that, we noted that there seemed to be a gap, and we thought that there was an opportunity to address that gap between the way that academics and student affairs work together. Through Joe's work with LearningWell and my exposure to the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network, we proposed this panel presentation to explore how all of you, well-being leaders and others, can adopt a whole campus approach. We really sought to enhance conversations between these two groups and improve the well-being of students and employees through greater collaboration. So today we want to explore fundamental approaches to whole campus well-being. We want to talk about where academic affairs and student affairs intersect most naturally. We want to talk a little bit about campuses that are really doing a great job bridging the divide and leveraging the role of faculty as well-being partners. We want to talk about how institutions can embed well-being into culture, policy, and assessment, and then think about together what deeper collaboration across organizations and networks could look like over the next few years. And so with that, I'd like to turn this over now to Marge Malpede, Editor-in-Chief of LearningWell Magazine and the moderator for today's webinar.
Thank you, Thad, and thank you for that great foundation. It's lovely to be with you all, and I'm excited to get started. So I will now introduce our panelists. Jennifer Fee is Assistant Director of Curriculum and Training Development at the Skorton Center for Health Initiatives at Cornell University. Hi, Jen. Kelly Gorman is the Director of the Office of Health Promotion at the University of Albany SUNY. She is also a member of the steering group of the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network. Hello, Kelly. Angela Lindler is the former interim vice provost in the Office of Undergraduate Affairs at the University of Florida and the interim director of UF's Engineering Leadership Institute. Hello, Angela. And then Joe Tranquillo, is the associate provost for transformative teaching and learning and professor at Bucknell University. Hi, guys. Thanks so much for being here today. So, all of our panelists have had experience in addressing the gap that exists in bridging well-being between academic and student affairs, which is why they're with us today. But before we get to the how of this work, I wanted to ask you guys about the why. And I might start with you, Kelly. Why is a whole campus approach to well-being so important? And what is at stake if we don't look at this as a collective effort?
Thank you, Marge. So to start in thinking about this question, I want to ground in actually understanding well-being as a term. We often conflate well-being with wellness, and if we're looking at the World Health Organization, they define well-being as it encompasses quality of life, the ability of people and societies to contribute to the world and have a sense of meaning and purpose. And so it's determined by the extent to which it's resilient, there's capacity for action, and is prepared to transcend challenges. So what we really see is well-being is a systemic outcome. Well-being is something that we are pursuing, and when we understand it as an outcome of systems and the interplays of different things happening within that system, the degree to which they facilitate health and harmony, we recognize that the only way to get there is through whole campus approaches. And so in the health promoting campuses literature, our movement, what we really do is we center an understanding of our campuses as interconnected dynamic systems. And that is our starting point to recognize, how do we design these? How do we influence the system so that the outcome, the natural byproduct, is well-being and flourishing? And so when we think about what's at risk if we don't break down the silos, I think first, it's not a risk, it's kind of just a fact, is that we have no chance of producing well-being so long as we have silos, right? We need to engage all parts of our system in order to achieve well-being. But by not doing so, we also stay stuck at good. And there are certainly different brands and flavors of branding good as different flavors of excellence, but that well is going to dry up pretty soon. And so really collectively as a system, as higher ed, we have a moment to think about, what do we have to gain? And that's kind of a guiding paradigm within the health promoting campuses movement, is not looking at what's at risk and what are we going to lose, is flipping that. What is possible that we might not be able to imagine or experience right now? What do we have to gain? And really thinking about, what if our systems were designed so that without any external intervention, they produced well-being and flourishing just by the way that they function? I invite you all to vision what that might look like, and I'm excited to chat more about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Jennifer, I might ask you this similar question. Do you share Kelly's thoughts about the interconnectedness of this work, and what do you worry about if we don't address that collectively?
Absolutely. I've been at Cornell Health for about 2 years, so I'm relatively junior in this. And I think when I first started, I thought of well-being as the opposite of what Kelly defined, right? More in individual terms of an individual responsibility. So I think the importance of breaking down the silos and looking at this as a whole campus approach. And I think what's at risk if we don't do it, echoing what Kelly said, but also just our core mission, our academic mission, because research is clear that without well-being, as Kelly defined it, everything suffers. Academic performance, people's creativity, our ability to work across differences, all of these really big goals suffer or can't happen without a basis of well-being.
Right. I want to give Joe and Angela a chance for a quick comment on that as well.
Sure. I can just say part of my background is as an engineer, and one of the things we think about is experience blueprinting. So don't worry about exactly the term, but you're all familiar with it. It's the idea of, you go to a restaurant and what you experience is the food, the music, and the ambiance, and maybe the server and stuff like that. And often I think when we think of well-being, we think of those folks who are on the front lines, right? The folks that are having direct contact with students. So the piece that I would add to the systemic nature of this is all of the things that happen in the background at universities that we often don't think of as contributing to well-being, but they do. So like that person who's way in the back office and the tech side of things, like they're like, I don't have anything to do with well-being. Well, you do, because if you're not doing your thing the way it needs to be done, it ends up having a ripple effect upward. So I just want to emphasize the systemic nature of that. And I think that's a strategy that you can, everybody is actually playing some role, even if it's indirect. And the piece I'll add to the what's at stake, um, boy, higher ed's under attack right now. I mean, let's all acknowledge that, right? And I think that we need to show what transformations are occurring in our students, how they're becoming these amazing citizen leaders that are going to go out into the world and do great things. They are going to tell volumes about like what we do. But if our students aren't well at our institutions, they won't get all of these great things out of our institutions that we want and hope for them to have. So I'm gonna stop there and pass it over to Angela.
And I'll just add to this. I think we all are all singing the same tune here. What's also at stake is the well-being of everybody on our campus, right? And our faculty, our administrators, staff. If we don't center around the purpose of higher ed, I'll also make a note, just echoing Kelly, as hopefully as I unfold our experience at UF and developing the UF Quest program. I think we're speaking a language of ecosystems, and that's my background in environmental microbiology. And I always looked at it this way, that everybody has a niche and one niche feeds the next, right? I mean, that builds the resilience of the system. So you'll probably hear more of that because I can't stop referring to a university as an ecosystem. And a shout out to my UF folks. They're probably rolling their eyes. We've heard this enough. Yes, thanks.
I doubt that. Angela, actually, if you don't mind, I might stick with you on the next big question, which I invite everybody to really get involved in this one. And as Thad said, please, I'm sure the audience has their own questions around this, which is really the meat of this webinar, which is, without being too negative, I want to ask about the barriers to this work, because everybody who has taken the time to be with us today knows, I shouldn't say knows, everybody knows, but are well aware of why they're doing this. Obviously, they're committed to this work. The how is tough. Angela, what in your experience have been sort of the biggest barriers to this? And then we are going to talk about strategies on breaking through those barriers, but let's identify what they are.
That's a meaty question, I'll say. And I'll just say that I'm speaking from the perspective of a former vice provost. A shout out to Dr. Rick Stepp, who's now our UF Quest director, and the faculty team. Everybody go to quest.ufl.edu. Click on the students tab, and at the bottom of that page is a nice visual. So it might make more sense as I describe some of the challenges we face. There were challenges that were very unique to University of Florida, but I also think challenges that are universal. And I'll just focus on two broad ones that may ring true to those listening today. And I'll just say that all of the challenges, and these particularly two, were a result of our natural tendency at universities to silo, and it is the natural direction. The silos that we were challenged, everybody will say the same. The nesting dolls of the silos of college, within disciplines, within the academic departments. The silos of the units that are all student facing, that are a part of any program that involves a core requirement for every undergraduate student. So you can rattle them off as you think about them, from the registrar, admissions, student life, from international center, undergrad research, you name it. They were all engaged in this. And every unit has something to hold on to that's dear to them. So when you're developing programs like this, you've got to break through those concerns. As I mentioned before, I am an environmental microbiologist. I look at ecosystems and sustainable engineering. Uh, what I liken this to is the second law of thermodynamics. I'm not going to go wild on everybody, but you've heard it before. Delta S is greater than zero, or entropy always increases in a system, right? Unless there's resistance to that. What it leads to is chaos. And in an ecosystem, the chaos more or less leads to lifelessness across the entire ecosystem, right? So the units don't talk to each other, and eventually death. It causes death. So the natural resistance to that is what the creator of biomimicry, Janine Benyus, calls all life creates condition for new life. Okay, and I carry that with me at the university campus because everything we do should create a condition for new life, right? So the delta S greater than zero at universities is siloing. That S stands for siloing. That's the natural direction unless we resist it, right? And so when I talk about these challenges that we had at UF in developing, and it took 5 years to develop UF Quest and before the launch, and we're still developing. This is hard work, y'all, and you all know this who do this. These challenges have to do with the siloing. And I break them out into two broad areas. One is what I call the challenge of the heart. And this is less about how to do the work, and it's more about convincing folks that it's important to do. And so changing hearts to agree to do this. And not only that, as our team now who's working on it, it's to continue to do it. How do you sustain it? It's one thing to start it, get it going, get the groups and everyone agreeing, but how do you sustain it? And so I liken this to the challenge of open heart surgery. We have to do it at the individual level, keep our hearts open, as well as the unit level. And that is the resistance to the primary law of university dynamics, which is the siloing. What suffers is life-transforming relationships if we don't do that, right, at every level. And the other challenge that we face, and I'm sure is consistent across other campuses and building such programs, is at the institutional level, right? So this is the practical things you put into place to ensure sustainability. And so I just mentioned three, and hopefully this will provoke questions from the audience. Developing a budget model that sustains the program, right? If your program focuses on transcending values, core values, and in our case, we call them non-negotiables, that is faculty student engagement is at a premium, small class sizes as an example. Experiential learning in every course and multidisciplinarity, student reflection all along the way of the 4 years of the program, it costs more. It just costs more. And so the budget model must help to support every niche in the ecosystem. The other part of the institutional structure challenge is clarity of roles. Every niche has to know what their role is. And this goes to what Joe was saying, is everyone is an educator on our campus, not just the players that we know, but all the way to, administrators, CFO's office, UFIT, our custodial staff. Everybody should know their role in supporting student well-being and should be able to say what their role is, right? This is very similar to military. If you visit an aircraft carrier, which I've done, everybody knows what their role is, right? And they can describe it. And it should be in position descriptions. It should be in all forms of evaluation and so forth. And then the third is technology support. And that's not only for platforms for effective teaching and learning and the funding that it requires, but also in sharing a set of metrics, success metrics that is across campus And then making the data accessible. There should be dashboards. So there should not be any ownership of data. It should be open and available, and everybody can see how we're doing in this agreed upon set of well-being metrics across the board. So I'll end here. Hopefully that provokes some additional questions.
Awesome. You obviously prepared for this, Angela. That was amazing. Thank you. Joe, what are you thinking?
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, well, Angela and I have worked together, so like, we're like we got the mind meld thing going on, and we're both systems people. So I'm gonna try not to repeat everything that she said and add a couple other pieces to it. I'm gonna start really high. Universities are blamed for being liberal, and we can have that debate of if we're liberal or not. But in reality, by the old definition, we are extremely conservative. We love our traditions. We love the status quo. We're very immune to change, right? So like by that definition, we're actually very conservative. And a lot of people in higher ed, like they're like, no, we don't mean that. I'm like, I don't mean that in a political way, right? I mean that in a resistance to change way. So what are some of the things that I've seen get in the way of the silo busting? So one is we become what we measure. So I've seen things go off the rails because we often can't measure what we really want to measure. So things like student success, thriving, flourishing, well-being, right? Like these big high-minded things, they're really, really hard to measure. So what we do is we come up with these proxies. And unfortunately, a lot of times those proxies get assigned to like this group or that group, and they become the group that's assigned to that proxy, and they will do whatever they can or need to do to make that proxy go in the right direction. Now, the problem is you then build reward structures around it, you build job descriptions around it, like you build things around those proxies, not around what you're actually trying to do. And I get it, right? That's really hard, but that I think is one of the things that silos things, and it's embedded in our structures, it's embedded in our policies, it's embedded in our hiring, it's embedded in our data flows, like all the things that Angela was talking about, it's embedded in those. What that often leads to is that big change is not one person's job, right? So this is back to that first question. It becomes everybody's job, and therefore it becomes nobody's job. So that becomes a barrier in and of itself. And it brings up, I saw someone talking about in the chat about resources, competition for resources. And that is resources of all kinds, right? It's staff lines, it's space, it's like, I mean, you name it, it's all sorts of different resources. So I'll give you a couple of other concrete ones. A barrier often is having a supportive, very high level administrator who is driving the right, whatever it is, and is championing it, and then they leave, right? And this is a phenomenon at so many campuses where like the key person leaves, and then the new person that comes in is like, yeah, I'm not into that. That's not my new thing. That's not how I'm going to get rewarded for what I'm doing, or kind of get promoted in my way. Or you have someone who comes in, but I'm going to spend a year or two listening to what needs to happen. Well, in that year or two, momentum can fall back, folks can fall back into bad patterns. Something I've learned, I'll share at least two things personally for me. One mistake is only paying attention to the coalition of the willing, only preaching to the choir. That feels good. It works great at first because you make really quick progress. It gives you bright spots to shine a light on and say like, look, this is the change that we're actually trying to make. But what it does is it means that there's then a bunch of people who are not included in the change. And if those folks have the inkling that if they complain, they can shut it down, they might. And we all know this, right? There are the naysayers that are on our campus. So bringing them in feels hard at first, but it's actually the goal of reaching out to them, right? Of reaching out to them. And sometimes the best you're going to do is to get them to stop fighting you. So a win is not converting them. A win is getting them to stop fighting you.
Yeah.
The last piece is patience. This is the hardest thing for me when you're doing change management is continuing to remind yourself that in a system that resists change, if you get quick change, it's probably change that can be undone really quickly. And that's hard, but I need to continue to remind myself of that. If it was too easy to change, it probably isn't going to stick and be sustainable. So I have all sorts of other bits and pieces, but I'm going to stop there because I think we want to hear from Jennifer and Kelly.
Yes, thank you so much, Joe. Um, Jen, I might start with you and move to Kelly. I'm curious too, same question. What are you seeing as some of the barriers to this work? And I may start with some of the maybe softer, I wouldn't say easier barriers, but maybe more universal. Is there a sense that this is maybe not my job? You know what I mean? That whole sense of like accountability. And that's actually what I love about what you guys are doing with the academic charter work, et cetera. It really opens up that accountability. Do you see that sense of like somebody else is going to deal with that when it comes to well-being on your campuses?
Mhm. Thank you for asking it that way, because Joe and Angela are going to be hard to follow because they came up with such great answers. It's almost like, oh, you took all my answers. Um, what was on my mind, since they've covered so much of the big picture, is that sort of the practical implications, like faculty and staff, everyone is stretched incredibly thin. And I think that's ironically part of the what's driving this need for this work in the first place, embedding well-being across silos. So one thing that's on my mind is asking people to engage in another initiative, even if it's something that they care about or that sounds good. It can feel like one more thing. So, a possible solution to that challenge could be embedding well-being into existing structures, versus creating new programs and new initiatives that people are like, oh, this is the next new thing we're being asked to do. Um, I also think I've had to work to help people understand that well-being is foundational to our success, which is what we were talking about earlier. Like, it is central to academic success. It isn't one more thing, it's a foundational thing. I think helping people envision this, I think we all love Joe's restaurant analogy because that's what I was thinking too, from every level at the of the university, helping people envision this as just part of their role and part of their job and part of what we need to do, echoing what Angela said as well.
So, Kelly, I want to give you an opportunity to comment on that, but I'm thinking we might flip to sort of what are then some of these practical strategies that you all have been working on, which again, I love how like transparent and honest you guys are about the barriers because there are many, but there are also some great ideas out there and some great programs. So let's talk about those. Jen, if you don't mind, I might stick with you because we've mentioned faculty many times, and a lot of this work, it really does sort of hit the road inside the classroom as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with faculty at WISE at Cornell? And can you start with, if you could just describe what that acronym actually is?
Sure, I love a good acronym.
We all
WISE
do.
is well-being in scholarly environments. And it is built upon other successes at places like Simon Fraser and UT Austin. And it's a faculty-facing program that we've developed over the last couple of years. Um, it's really as part of our health promoting campus efforts to embed well-being at every level. And students obviously spend a lot of time in classrooms, and that's also a source of a lot of their stress and the imposter syndrome that they're feeling and these other things. So we needed to and wanted to build supports into the academic environments, into the classrooms. And so that's involved a lot of work with faculty, helping faculty understand that well-being is central to academic success. That's been part of the role, and we want to build these upstream approaches for students so that when they're in their classrooms learning, they're getting the best education possible. One of the challenges I hear from faculty is a lot of our students are struggling from mental health challenges. There's a lot of students with accommodations, a growing number, a very large number of students with accommodations now. And faculty are struggling, like, how can I take care of my students, but also maintain academic rigor? So I think there's that balance that they're striving for. And so again, I have to make sure that they're seeing the strategies that I'm sharing with them as not one more thing, but helping them do their jobs better, contributing to the academic success of students, and also supportive of students and their academic success. So WISE is now a toolkit. So it's an online resource built in Canva that faculty can visit and get strategies and resources. They're things that are research-based and evidence-based. So one of my favorite examples is building connection from day one. So how can we in our syllabus indicate that we're supportive of student well-being? So maybe a statement about mental health resources on campus. Also, on the first day of class, can we build something into our classrooms that helps our students get to know each other? Maybe reveal things about ourselves and our own struggles in academia to build connection with students. So from day one, building those things. Research-backed processes like extension without penalty statements and policies. So a student can better manage their time. They can take care of themselves in emergencies. They understand from day one what those flexibility points will be. And then addressing faculty concerns that, well, and how much can I give the students? How much flexibility and still hold that academic rigor? So providing the research to faculty that these things work, that they serve the students well, that they actually help the students academically and manage their learning better. And we also do training. So we've got the toolkit, and we also have started doing workshops to support faculty in implementing these strategies and learning about the toolkit. Like I said, it's only about a year old. There's about 100 faculty that are involved in the toolkit, so there's a lot of space to grow. We did a workshop series last fall called Teaching with Care, and talked about like these particular times and the struggles that we as faculty and staff are facing and that the students are facing, and really just try to show support for the faculty and their individual well-being, our collective well-being, and the student well-being. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yep, that's great, Jen. I'm sure there's going to be probably too many for us to get to today, so I want to do that for sure. But Kelly, I want to bring you in. Kind of combine both the last question and this previous question and this last one, which is, what do we need to do to get this work done? And from your perspective, particularly in your role at the I always forget your acronym, the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network. Can you tell us what you're seeing in terms of recommended practices, good examples?
Thank you, Marge. I think, kind of bridging both of these, it's recognizing that for any of this work to happen, we need infrastructure. And, I think in higher ed, we get really used to do more with less. And you're starting to see people who have even more gold stars because they're doing so much more with so much less. We could talk about that another time. But I think, we need to name that you need infrastructure to lead this work. And in the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network, we recognize that we need to dive into the discipline and the expertise of health promotion to guide that process, to guide that work. I think something that's challenging is that within our system of higher education, we know that a lot of things are built around competition. And that's where a lot of these silos form from. And it's not necessarily bad, but when we don't name it, we can't actually have a healthy relationship with it either. And so if we're leaning into this process of health promotion to produce well-being, to produce these outcomes, health promotion is fundamentally about empowerment. It's fundamentally about bringing together. The way that we're structured, oftentimes what gets in the way of that is folks needing to show that they achieved an outcome and they need the credit in order to get the recognition. That kind of conflates with this whole notion of empowerment at the kind of foundation of it. So as we do that, we need infrastructure that is able to, have this pursuit of the health promoting campus without kind of needing to say, here's all the cookies that we have for the great work that we did, right? We need that deep and earnest investment, because what we know from organizational change, what we know from our health promoting university literature base, is that identifying an agenda and a vision that is communicated widely and that is supported with the infrastructure to move forward is one of the most important things that we can do. Our literature base is a little bit younger. And so we've been really excited in the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network to launch a whole new area that is focusing only on scholarship, research, and generating different metrics that folks can pursue as they go. I was excited that, Angela, you mentioned before data walks and making data accessible. That's one of the biggest practices that we could recommend across the board. Make your data accessible, do a data walk, right? When we think about who is setting the agenda and who's invited to this table, are you inviting folks from facilities to reflect on data about belonging? And what do the folks in finance and accounting think about that? At the end of the day, we do have a finite amount of resources to guide all of this. And so how can we include more voices at the table, expand that lens of knowledge that we see as worthwhile? But really, that's where the strategies come from, and they're going to be unique to each campus. In my research, I looked at executive leadership decision-making and organizational change surrounding adoption of the Okanagan Charter. And that was one of the biggest things that we saw, is that leaders wanted to see that this was a way to operationalize their values and put this into action and drive that forward. And they wanted the entire campus to embody this together. And so as we move forward with that, it's recognizing that we need distributed leadership. You can't have just one person or one office, leading everything, which is different than infrastructure, right? You need that infrastructure, but you need leaders from all different areas to bring their perspective to the table. The last part I'll kind of say about that is just an example. We were meeting with some of our leadership on our campus earlier this week in our well-being collective. And one of the leaders was reflecting on, this is the only committee that they're a part of where they're actually asked and tasked with some of the creation of goals and creating what that agenda is. And that was a new experience. And I thought for me that felt like such a powerful point of like, it means that we're coming to the table with openness, with learning from each other, all dissecting data together, but then really thinking about how do we create practical strategies and things that align with the institution we are right now, where we hope to go, and leverage our culture and values for the pursuit of these broader goals.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to move now to audience questions, because we've got a ton of good ones. We're not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to start and hopefully ask them quickly and then see whoever wants to jump in. I thought this was a good one. Do folks have an example of something they have been able to take off people's plates or make more efficient to create room for a new initiative? Is there a tradition/status quo that higher education can get rid of at this point that some campuses are overlooking? Anything spring to mind?
I'll jump in and talk a little bit about how we dealt with that and this one more thing issue with faculty in UF Quest. One of the key elements that made it successful is that Quest, these are new courses and they're very unique to the program, so they're not duplicative, which means faculty needed to create them following our core values and non-negotiables that we coached them up on. Well, we made it part of their assignment. Our provost was very clear that this is not an overload. This is part of your teaching assignment. It counts towards your tenure and promotion. That was a critical move. So it in a way, it's making it more efficient. Now it causes a ripple effect for department chairs. Well, who's going to teach this course and this course? But we worked it out. Okay. And a lot of this just needs to be worked out through conversations, many conversations. It's just an example.
Thank you, Angela. Unless anyone wants to jump in, we'll go to another question.
I'll give like a 3 second
You go,
or maybe
Joe.
10 second thing. Um, our first year courses are overloaded with everything. We just launched a micro credential thing, and those micro credentials are now available to be assigned in academic classes. And one of those modules is well-being. And it's a self-paced thing that students can do, and faculty can actually assign it. And it
Excellent.
took
Thank
and it
you.
took things off of the faculty members.
We like when things get unloaded from plates. I like this one because it has to do with leadership and institutional change. So, for anyone, how do you suggest we discuss with C-suite higher-ups that typically have more business and academic backgrounds the importance of the whole student wellness and campus well-being beyond graduation and other normal metrics? Is it possible to achieve well-being goals when high-level administration goals are critical of science in general? Maybe I'm asking two questions.
I,
Sorry, I think I
I'm
am.
gonna give an extremely snarky first answer, then other folks can talk about it.
You go.
Because my work started as a retention strategy from the administration. And I said, you know what's worse than losing a student or not having them graduate? It's having them graduate and then them and their parents spending their entire rest of their life complaining about the university and how awful we are. That's actually worse than having them leave after their first year. So I think the message there was speaking a language that they would listen to, because when I said it that way, they were like, oh, yeah, you're right. We actually don't want to graduate people that hate us. That would be really bad.
Great example. Anyone else have thoughts on this? Because the way you can look at it is, a lot of this, particularly in terms of the big culture change work, I know, Kelly, you've done a lot of work in this area, has to do with, leadership messaging. I mean, are people getting it at the top?
One thing I would jump in with is that you can make the case using any language, and I think that's where a lot of the power comes in is when you're willing to understand, okay, what is this person in this position? What are they most concerned about right now, right? What in what ways do they think that the institution is underperforming, failing, or that it could just improve? Because when we look at this as that system, right, it's all interconnected. So what we might see in one front, if we're looking at residential life data, it's actually connected to what they might be seeing in financial aid, or when you're looking at the business accounts. And so it's about starting with the language that everyone is speaking, their top concerns, bringing folks together, and then being able to trace those paths in, because at some point when you get to a level of root cause analysis, you're going to be on the same playing field. You're going to be at that same table, and the table will be better because you see all of the impacts that come from the common problem of practice that you've been able to identify.
Thank you. Another question. I like this one too. What are the thoughts on peer education and getting students involved to break down social barriers? My thinking is we can do a lot on the back end and high levels, but without student buy-in and involvement, it can be difficult to generate behavior change and cultural change. Just thinking about students as a leg to the institutional transformation. Great question. Experience on working with students. Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I'm going to jump in again. Peer education is one of the practices that is most near and dear to my heart, and I think we're all probably here on this panel because we have a deep belief in our hearts that our students are the best of what we have to offer the world for tomorrow. And so I think the same is true with our students on our campuses. I think elevating their voices and letting them lead us to what Joe was talking about before. Our institutions are so good at resisting change. They're so good at recreating how they've always known the world to be. And our students come in and they're bright and they're energized, and all they know is the potential of the future. And so how can we uplift that and raise that? And peer education is one of the best practices for building those skills, for advocacy, for developing vision, and actually supporting students in pursuing getting experience, creating a vision, and then making it come to life. When a student can say, hey, I want to put on a big event, and maybe we want to put a themed basketball game on, and then you help them get the skills, the tools, meet with the right people, and you see them at that basketball game that is completely themed around what they want it to be themed, and they're like, oh my gosh, like this went from just a vision or a dream, and now like I'm sitting at a basketball game and there's hundreds of people here, right? That type of empowerment is so important. But they see the ways that their little ripples, their actions can have really big impacts from there. And we have to position them so we can ride the flow of what they produce.
Love it. And I'll add a piece to that. And that is when I talk to students about this, because often they have been conditioned to think of themselves as passive receivers of education, to say, look, there's more of you than us on this campus. You spend more time with each other than you do with the adults on the campus. Like, in terms of thinking about this as a holistic experience, this education that you're actually going through, you actually are more shaping it than right any of the adults on campus in many ways. And so when framed that way, it's like, okay, well, how do we do it? How do we become part of the teachers too? And I think when you frame it that way, then it becomes a curiosity. Students want to know, well, the only thing holding me back now is I don't know how to do it. It's like, okay, well, we can teach you that, right? Come and learn how to actually be a great support, a great teacher, a great mentor to other students.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so another question. We have a comment here from Gianna Boveri, which I think is interesting. A large barrier for me is having to support students in crisis multiple times a day, taking away from planning time and larger collaboration to break down siloing. Would someone like to comment on how to address this challenge? I might throw in there, well, we haven't really talked about today, which is sort of the very specific work that student affairs professionals do, particularly clinicians within the counseling center, and the connection and coordination with those folks. I think it has a way into this question. Did anyone else want to comment about that? Actually dealing with students' own mental health.
I think one thing I would throw out there is well, two things. One is that there's a lot of innovative practices that folks are doing across the country to make counseling more accessible for students, break down some of those barriers. Our counseling center has a really wonderful liaison relationship, and so they have relationships with departments in all different areas of campus, so that they're easier pipelines for students to get connected. And I think that's a part of any comprehensive system of supports for students, and particularly providing excellent quality, very accessible clinical services and supports in that way. I think at the heart of the health promoting campuses movement is honoring and centering this both and, right? We absolutely need that. And also, we need that infrastructure that can pull us out, that the infrastructure that can say, our job is not crisis management. Our job is to help the folks that are in crisis understand which crises could you actually put on someone else's plate, right? And when you're reacting to crisis, you don't actually have the capacity to do that too. And so we need to create some of those different layers for strategy so we can reorient, what is coming to whose plates, why, how, and make sure that it aligns with our goals.
And
I'll
from
give
the
one snippet, and that is preventative medicine. We've focused a lot on health here, right? One way around this is can you do a little bit of preventative maintenance? It's not going to be a catch-all. It's not going to prevent crises from happening, but it can hopefully catch at least some of the magnitude.
Right. And we talk a lot about that at the coalition, the kind of active classrooms and mentorships that actually lead to improved well-being over time. So thanks for saying that, Joe. I think everyone would agree. I have a question here that I'm just curious as how you guys might answer it. Maybe, Angela, you have thoughts on this. As human well-being will require systems thinking skills, restorative economics policy, and ecological literacy, would the panel speak to specific ways any of those key concepts are integrated in all academic curriculum? I know that's a tough question.
It's an interesting question. It's very interesting. I think it's insightful in that it implies the curriculum, the academic curriculum, really needs to be relevant to everything else that's going on campus, right? And we again tend to work in our own discipline silos. I really think it goes back to this question, and I think this echoes the previous responses. We need to do a better job at again, let's go back to define what our role is. So as Kelly was talking about, is my role as a faculty member to deal with the crisis at hand, right? And it's not, but I need to know how to get that student where that niche is to deal with that. And so as a faculty member, when I'm developing a course, and this goes to a little bit of what Jennifer's talking about in her toolkit for faculty, how do I develop the course and with threads to the greater whole, right? So, there are means of doing that I'm sure other campuses are, and the simple ones are adding information on the syllabus, which students never read, right? But it's the echoing within the classroom and in the context of the content of why this is important at the larger scale of their health and well-being. And I can say, regardless of discipline, engineering, as much as any other discipline, needs that. I don't know if that truly answers the question, but I appreciate the question because it's incredibly insightful.
Angela, I have to just give you a shout out. When you and I were doing the article on Quest, one of the things that you said that I thought I just loved, it was about love. You were saying, as a result of all the work that you did with faculty, getting them to understand the threads to the whole, you were very pleased with the results. And you were talking a lot about how, for the first time in a long time, you heard faculty saying the word love. I love my students. I love what I'm doing. I love teaching. And so I just thought that was great, that the results of this work can be amazing. Okay, back to questions. Sorry, you guys, I'm not supposed to be myself.
I just want to make an observation on what was there,
Oh.
because I think it's a difficulty that faculty face. Is students often in courses are taught to like take off their who they are and put on their intellectual hat when they do it. So all of the things that we're talking about ecology and systems thinking and all of that becomes kind of intellectualized, and it becomes about the world out there, right? Like, we're going to think of econ as a system or biology as a system. And I think what I was reading into the question is, how do we actually get them to turn that systems thinking inward to themselves, thinking as a whole human being inside? And I think that requires faculty making that connection of, you are not only learning about the systems of econ, you're learning systems thinking, which you can also point in towards yourself. Because otherwise it becomes siloed in their mind as system thinking is only applying to things out there.
Yep. So I think this is probably got to be the last question. If Dana were there, she'd be giving me a hook, I think, at this point. But I like this one. So how can we respectfully educate our own institutional leaders about how slow-moving these systems level changes are in the face of an understandable demand for tangible goal progress? And this brings up systems change work. And I know I'm going to put you on the spot, Kelly. Sorry. Kelly or Angela, anyone, Jen, Joe. Who would like to jump in on that? How slow moving these system level changes are? How do we respectfully educate our own institutional leaders about that?
I'm happy to jump in first. And in the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network, one of the kind of seminal scholarship pieces, I would say, has become seminal for us, and I think it is just broadly, but is looking at the water of systems change. And I imagine or hope someone may link to that in the chat. But when we're looking at systemic change, there's different layers to it. And so the easiest layer to change are policies, job descriptions, and then there's layers beneath it. At the foundation to create transformative change is actually examining our mental models. It's thinking about, how do we make meaning of the world in front of us, and how, like, what guides that. And I think it's in its simplest form, it's understanding what assumptions do we carry with us that are making us see what we see at a moment in time, and being open to shifting that. I'll say with the Health Promoting Campuses Network and Health Promoting Universities, is this shift from a pathogenic approach to a salutogenic approach. So pathogenic would be one mental model that looks for disease to treat and fix it, and that's how you produce health. Yeah. That is a certainly valid way of doing it. The other mental model, or another one that we would put out there, is that of salutogenesis. Salutogenesis says, what creates health? How do we center that and do more of that? And so in some ways, that's the difference between prevention and promotion, right? Prevention, you're preventing something bad from happening. And promotion is you're saying, all right, how can we build more and more of these good things? And so at that mental model level, that's where the change needs to happen. But it does need to happen at all of these different levels as well.
Awesome. I'm going to have to let Kelly be the last word from the panelists because we are going to bring Thad back on to kind of wrap this up together and talk about how we move forward. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome. Thad, did you want to come back on and give us some parting thoughts?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Marge. Thanks, everyone. Hey, I heard some really, really powerful t-shirt slogans. I heard well-being as a systemic outcome. Big change requires collaboration. Health promotion is empowerment. We heard some really fascinating, rich discussion today around enhanced collaboration and institutional well-being. I think we even dug into specific strategies and examples of cross-functional well-being work. A few of the strategies included faculty and academic integration through WISE at Cornell. Things like, I heard a thread through many of the conversations related to collective impact. We heard about the learning community through U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network, things like data walks. And even in the chat, there was a listing about, this was really remarkable to me. Somebody has a well-being scholar position, all incredible strategies. But of course, we're kind of impacted by all of these barriers too that we face: entropy, siloing, leading organizational change, glacial change dynamics, champions who leave, struggling with capacity building, struggling to have enough staff. So there's a lot of good work that is still to be done. With that, I think there's a lot for us to think about. I'd like to thank Marge and our panelists for their remarkable insights. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the LearningWell staff, Dana Humphreys, Keith Buffington, Jack and Molly, and Chris Daw from the leadership of the U.S. Health Promoting Campuses Network, all of them for their contributions. And for everyone still on the call, I'd like to thank you for your interest and attendance today. I think we originally had about 750 registered, and we were pushing 500 at this webinar today, so there's clearly a strong interest in this topic. We're going to hope to continue this conversation into the future. What we're going to do next is to reach out to those who've registered via email with more information. And if there are any questions that remain, please feel free to reach out to Dana Humphreys at dana@learningwell.org. Again, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful afternoon and be well.